snapshot in time and not a range of conditions across a varying wetland. So perhaps the best way to get a continuous record through time from before human impact and after is through paleolimnology, and hence CPALIM, of course. So I'll just give you an example down near where I live called the Gippsland Lakes. It's a very large coastal wetland system. It's about to suffer the impacts of sea level rise. It's suffering the impact of river regulation. It has huge hazardous algal blooms. And for navigation, it was a closed system, and the system was opened in 1891 so that people could take their boats out, just like the ports we have along the coast here near Semarang. It was listed as a RAMSAR site in 1985. It is internationally significant under 5 or 6 criteria. And there's a large catchment which includes forestry, agriculture and coal mining, amongst other things, including pulp and paper making. So it has a lot of sources of pollution. And it has a large fishing and tourism industry. Here is a paleolimnology record which covers 500 years or so, 200 to 500 years. That's the entrance, which has been maintained using engineering, and it was recently dug deeper so they could access the oil mines, in fact, offshore. And that's allowed more seawater to come in and impact by killing the vegetation in the inland lakes. And nowadays, and not everybody knows this, while they can see jellyfish and crabs coming in because the mouth is now open, they don't realise that there are now hammerhead sharks inside the Gippsland lakes. So we wait to see what impact that is. The diatom record here shows on the left, and that's a bit pale. Which one's pointer again? The top one. Here are estuarine lagoonal diatom species, and they shifted to marine diatom species. So the natural character has changed from lagoonal to marine, as you might expect if you created a big opening like that. That's the fastest body of water in the whole of the eastern part of my state. The tidal water rushes in and rushes out in great volume. Additionally, we've managed to extract algal pigments from that same record, and we can see at the bottom that it was naturally algae rich, including cyanobacteria, because cyanobacteria are natural. The opening was put in here, and the flushing effect reduced the incidence of algae. But over time, because of nutrient loads coming in from the catchment, that increased. The cyanobacteria increased back to pre-opening levels, and now we have chlorophyll A at least 10 times the background levels. So we have a completely different system on account of nutrients as well as the mouth opening. So for the Gippsland Lakes, what is the natural ecological character? Is it before 1891? Is it in the 1940s? Is it 1985 when it was listed? Or is it today? There are many different natural characters it can be. So that sort of long-term evidence that paleolimnology provides allows us to understand better long-term change and places in context the condition we are presently in. And it takes away that shifting baseline concept. We get to understand the baseline, and we can understand whether it's natural or anthropogenic change. We can understand whether it's positive or negative change, and it enables us to decide better about whether it needs restoration and when and in what direction and what target to pursue. Now back to wise use. I remind you that all signatory countries are required to adopt wise use in managing all wetlands. All wetlands, not just the sites. All wetlands come under wise use. So the Convention of Wetlands requires all contracting parties to formulate and implement their planning so as to promote as far as possible the wise use of wetlands in their territory. So wise use is the maintenance of their ecological character and their ecosystem services, achieved through the implementation of ecosystem approaches within the context of sustainable development. So you're allowed to develop, you're allowed to have ports, you're allowed to go fishing, all these sorts of ecosystem services that humans get from the wetland, but you need to maintain the ecological character while you're doing that. So it's like ecological sustainable development in your wetlands. And if you've signed up to RAMSAR, then you're obliged to do that for all your wetlands. And if you're not, then you're breaching your signature to the RAMSAR Convention. So, more local. RAMSAR in Indonesia. RAMSAR joined the convention in August 1992, so that's just over 32 years ago. So you've been an active partner, and if COPs are every 3 years, you've been to 10 COP meetings. So Indonesia has participated on your behalf actively for, well over half of the time that the RAMSAR Convention has been in place. Indonesia has 8 RAMSAR sites, and it has many, many wetlands which come under wise use. And it has 1.3 million hectares of wetlands listed under RAMSAR. They come under those criteria and the ecological character descriptions. So in Sumatra there is Burbak National Park, which is large, it's 162,000 hectares. Peat swamp and freshwater swamps. It has endangered birds, storm stork, white-winged wood duck and hornbill, and mammals come under, if you remember, criterion 9. Rhino, tapir and sun bear will all contribute to the criteria of listing for that site. And of course, the boundary to the wetland will include dry land. So the sun bear doesn't have to go swimming to be listed as part of the RAMSAR site. In West Kalimantan is Danau Sentarum Wildlife Reserve, 80,000 hectares. Similarly, swamp forest, large numbers of fish and birds, and the largest inland population of proboscis monkey. Again, a mammal contributing to the significance of that site. Manipo Nature Recreation Park in Timor is smaller, 2,500, but it's larger than Pulau Rambat just off Jakarta, which is an island of only 90 hectares. But sufficiently significant because of the largest breeding colony of milky stork, which allows it to qualify in at least one criterion. Rawa Opa Watamohai National Park in Sulawesi, 105,000 hectares with peat swamps, milky stork again, and a critical stopover point for migratory birds on the way from Russia to Australasia. Sembilang National Park in South Sumatra, 202,000 hectares, I think that's your largest. Mangrove estuary and swamp forests, tiger, elephant, storm stork and giant turtle, so even reptiles get a list there, and used by up to 1 million shorebirds during the annual migration. So clearly significant. And Tanjung Puting National Park in central Kalimantan, 408,000, that's in fact the largest. No, the next one is. Swamp forests, largest habitat for Kalimantan orangutan, so again a mammal being significant. Wazoo National Park in Irian Jaya, over 400,000 hectares as well. Again, another important migratory stopover. And so they're the 8 sites that are listed in Indonesia of international significance. So what has RAMSAR managed to achieve? RAMSAR has been enormously successful in becoming the most universally applied environmental program across the planet. You might have heard of the Climate Convention. Well, this predated that. It predated the United Nations Environment Program. It predated United Nations Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services conventions. So, in fact, it's been a leader, and many of those new, more well-known conventions have taken lessons from the RAMSAR Convention over the years. So, it's entirely likely, given there's 173 countries signed up, that the RAMSAR Convention has done a lot in preserving and conserving wetlands around the world. That said, the world's wetlands continue to decline and biodiversity, aquatic biodiversity, is under great threat. So even despite the RAMSAR Convention, 2.5 million square kilometres of land coming under sites, there is continued degradation of wetlands. So there remains a great challenge to avert the worst impacts of humanity on the world's wetlands. And in some places the impacts are accelerating, so we need more of you to do more to protect not only the 8 sites that Indonesia has, but to convince the government they need to do more with respect to wise use of all of Indonesia's wetlands. So the future for RAMSAR, as we put in chapter 20 of our book, RAMSAR just celebrated 50 years in 2021, and some of the directions might be to increase recognition of the risks of people to wetlands. And I think historically people have thought of wetlands as backwaters, as swamps, as smelly, a place where you don't go. Increasingly we recognise the importance for biodiversity in swamps and wetlands and the contribution that they have to all biodiversity. We need to learn how to accommodate change in character, particularly with climate change and sea level rise. Provide leadership to parties, increase the interaction between developed countries and developing countries, and increase the exchange of knowledge between countries so that we have Indonesian students coming to Australia and we have people like me, preferably younger people than me, coming to Indonesia to provide you with capacity in terms of wetland management. Recognise wetlands as socio-ecological systems. RAMSAR never excludes people from the concept of wetland conservation. Increasingly, RAMSAR is engaging in the interaction between people and biodiversity. And it's only there where there'll be sufficient acceptance to drive people to act to conserve the values and the ecosystem services that wetlands provide people. And lastly, promote the value of wetlands. How are they important? We can see along this coastline that mangroves are critical for protection from ongoing climate change. And we need to value that both ethically as well as financially so we can convince government to do more to protect wetland systems. So thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions. I hope I have another one.
Okay, any questions, or should I make a summarize in Indonesia? Okay. State your names. You can write and then state your name.
Thank you for the time. Firstly, my name is Shalina. So I'm sorry if my pronunciation is just bad. I have two questions about the wetlands. So the first question is how to manage wetland in tropical country, especially in Indonesia, so that their diversity remains sustainable and can be mutually beneficial for the creatures living around them, such as human, animal, and also the plant. And the second question is how to manage wetlands properly so that the diversity they have doesn't experience a population explosion, which will certainly be dangerous for the environmental and surrounding living thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk of two scales. There is the local scale, and there's no reason why a community group can't work together to convince local government to take measures to protect and restore your local wetland. And that happens all around the world. In many instances, it's very easy for Western countries to do that. But I always say most of the biodiversity in the world is in the tropics. And that's not necessarily where most of the wealth is in the world, where most of the money is. So there needs to be an exchange between the countries that have got a long-term history of knowledge and wealth, supporting countries in the tropics. So there needs to be a interaction, and that capacity building is critical. But at the local scale, anybody can learn from the web about what other people are doing around the world and apply that to their local wetland. At the other scale is motivating government to invest in wetlands and recognising wetlands, and that comes from lobbying and reminding the government that they are a signatory to RAMSAR and they have obligations, international obligations under RAMSAR to protect their 8 RAMSAR sites, which they are doing very well, but they probably need to be reminded, and they do in Australia as well, that they have an obligation to wise use of all wetlands. And that's protecting the ecosystem services that are often traded off by people who want to get benefit through the provisioning services at the expense of cultural and regulating services, for example. So there's a lobbying and there's a local and there's everything in between. So it's a matter of dealing with the issue for each individual wetland. Regulating populations of wildlife is a matter of bringing the community to the table so that they understand the risk and they understand the value, and then they can personally trade off the risk against the value of the threats of what might be in a wetland. There are many places in the world that deal with crocodiles and snakes and all sorts of things in their neighbourhood, and that's a matter of understanding and dealing and mitigating the risk for humans. Did that answer that second part of the question? Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, good afternoon, sir. My name is Rafiq. And as the previous person, forgive my lack of speaking skills. Okay.
Well, you're right. Yeah.
Yes. So I would like to ask, when we talk about the environment or the wetlands itself, we know that it's not just about we just not talk about the environment, but we have to know about the value in economically or even politically. We, as just another student here, what can we do if we know there are issues in certain wetlands? Do we have to join some communities first, or we have to do a research first, or else? What the best we can do if we see an issues about the wetlands there? Thank you.
Well, all of those. So do your research and join a community group and exchange ideas, but also as an individual, you can impress on your government that if somebody is developing a port and they don't consider the ecological values, then you're generating wealth, but at the same time you're reducing wealth. You're reducing ecological wealth. You're reducing the other services that other people might get. So it's not a win, it's a win and a loss. So we need to press on government to make sure that, yes, you can have a win from development, but you can't do it at the expense of the other services which impact upon other people. And that's part of the political process. We elect our leaders and they make decisions, but they are accountable. That's what the electoral process allows us to do. So if enough people want to get together and say that's not good enough for us, and they feel electoral pressure, then you might get the decision changed. I'm not sure what the environmental impact assessment process is, particularly here in Indonesia, but in Australia we have mechanisms by which you can contest projects that might impact a wetland at a small court. And the minister has to take into account your submission. You need to work through those processes because they're the processes laid down in the law and the constitution. So, but there's no reason why you can't impress on politicians from your scientific knowledge of the likely impact of this to other values.
Yeah, thank you.
And we need to remember that there are many oil and coal and power lobbyists talking to our government all the time and influencing them in the opposite direction. So we need to do more of doing our lobbying in protection of the environment.
Any other questions?
A quick further point, and everybody can do this, is to use your buying power. If you buy things that are unsustainable, you are fostering the economic system that is degrading our environment. So if you learn from your studies of the processes that are unsustainable, then you don't buy those products. So we can do that every day. And eventually companies realise that they're losing market share because they're not caring for the environment. So you might get greenwashing, but there are many companies now that are very seriously investing in environmental conservation around the world.
Well, thank you for the time, sir. My name is Adi, and I only have one question.
It's good.
Okay. As what I know, human interaction with the environment usually always results in a negative way, whether it be waste or from building and construction. But does RAMSAR regulate any of this, or does it actually encourage the interaction between human and environment instead of minimizing the interaction so that
Okay.
the negative impact is much less?
Yeah, no, I understand. We can always encourage government and community and industry to pursue the circular economy, because somebody's waste is somebody's resource. Not everything we don't need is waste. And there's great pressure to change our socio-economic system to bring in a circular economy so we vastly minimise waste. We had a panel meeting last year about plastic in Semarang, and I'm not sure we've got very far on that yet, but we need to find a way of avoiding water bottle plastic, because those water bottles break down, the microplastics get in the fish that we eat. So we're eating plastic when we're eating fish, and that's not good for us. The RAMSAR Convention, depending on who you are, some people think the RAMSAR Convention is taking over government. Some people think RAMSAR Convention is not strong enough. The RAMSAR Convention can't force government to do anything. The RAMSAR Convention is a cooperation between the 173 countries. It can encourage countries to do the right thing, but it generally works by way of embarrassment. So if it is demonstrated that a wetland has become degraded, then that becomes revealed at the COP meeting, and that nation is embarrassed in front of 172 other countries that they're not managing their wetlands. And international pride and international embarrassment are very strong forces. And we've seen international pride with the Olympics and Paralympics. Well, the opposite works very strongly as well. If you embarrass countries because they don't adequately protect their wetlands. And you might be able to imagine some of the countries that are accused of not managing their wetlands. We accuse them of lots of things, and they are also the ones that don't protect very well their wetlands. But they're encouraged to do so through the RAMSAR process, and that's all that RAMSAR can do effectively. But it can be a very strong influence in how a country decides to manage wetlands. And of course, it's also about sharing knowledge. And if you can inform governments that it's not just give and take, that you can have your development and you can manage your wetlands as well, then that might encourage those nations to better integrate biodiversity conservation with sustainable development. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir. My name is Tanti, and I want to ask about right now, Indonesia has a lot of construction ongoing, like reclamation or anything. But what I want to ask is, are there any specific consequences if any country violating the RAMSAR Convention?
A second party in Indonesia, you can write to RAMSAR and say, my country is doing this. If RAMSAR recognises that as a major risk to an important site, then RAMSAR can write to your Minister for the Environment and ask for an explanation. And that's about as much as RAMSAR can do. But again, the Minister doesn't like getting letters like that from an international convention.
Okay, thank you. My name is Latifa Tunisa. I asked, there are several things that drive change in wetlands. And then how does the hydroelectric power threaten wetland change? What from will the change take? Hydroelectric power. Yes. Yes.
How does it impact the wetland? Oh, there's a whole journal on the impact of hydroelectric power on on wetlands. Let me start it. Well, it changes water temperature because the water that comes out of the bottom of the weir is cold. The water that normally comes from the top of the weir is warm. That suppresses fish breeding, changes chemical processes. The water comes out at a different speed. That can change geomorphic processes. It interrupts migration patterns of fish. It turns moving water into still water, and that improves conditions for blue-green algae. There are a myriad of impacts of river regulation for hydroelectric power. It also increases carbon emissions. World's reservoirs are net sources of carbon into the atmosphere, whereas a moving river would not be. As I said, there's river research and applications is a whole journal that's been going for 30 years, which brings papers in on the impact of regulation. And in the US of A, they're now knocking down dam walls, large reservoirs, to increase the passage for fish and to reduce those impacts associated with hydroelectric power. There was one paper I attended many years ago now that looked at the carbon emissions from a reservoir in South America, in tropical South America. The climate change potential emerging from that reservoir was per unit of energy produced was actually greater than a coal-fired power station. So the hydroelectric power in tropical areas was worse for the climate than coal.
Okay, thank you.
So, of course, methane emissions, which come out of reservoirs, methane is more than 80 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So mitigating methane emissions is really, really important.
Any other questions? No? Do you want
No,
anything to say something? No?
I thank everybody for coming along. I've enjoyed presenting to you all. It's always very colourful audience in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that is our class today. That now we able to know more deeply about RAMSAR, what is RAMSAR, and whenever we compare, the RAMSAR site in Indonesia is 1.something million hectare. That is RAMSAR site. But it is slightly because wetlands in Indonesia, it is about 39 something. And then it is more than half of our wetlands, especially mangrove ecosystem, it's already degraded. Means that less than 50% it is already degraded. So it is our responsibility is that the degradation always climbing up, and then we didn't have the wetland even for the RAMSAR sites, or we able to do something, at least we started from ourselves. And then, because you are all the students, started with the study about RAMSAR. Okay, thank you for your kind attention. I hope you able to make, because I asked them to make summarize of your lessons, and then I think you able to make a good summarize, and then 5 students that already have the questions, tomorrow come to my office, I have something small souvenir for you. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Before we close this event, we have a little present for Prof. Peter Gell, Prof. Nani. Give some little present.
Okay, as we reach the end of today's Stadium General, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to all of you for your participation and engagement. Your contribution and enthusiasm have made this event a success. We are also grateful to our speakers, for Peter Gell and the facilitator, for sharing their invaluable knowledge and insight. Your expertise has dramatically enriched our discussion and learning experiences. Through this event, we hope to establish communication and harmonious relationships among all of us. We apologize for any shortcomings and mistakes in our speech. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.